Escape from hell. The air was thick with the stench of burning flesh and sulfur. A crimson glow bathed the jagged rocks and blackened ruins that stretched endlessly into the distance. Ethan awoke to the sound of wailing, the screams of tortured souls echoing from every direction. His last memory was of the cold steel of a knife piercing his chest, the betrayal by a so-called friend, and the warmth of his own blood spilling onto the floor. Now, he was here, in a place that could only be hell. He scrambled to his feet, his body feeling oddly whole despite the fatal wound he had suffered. His clothes were tattered, his hands stained with something dark. Around him, figures writhed in torment, their flesh peeling, their voices pleading for mercy that would never come. Towering demons with burning eyes and jagged claws prowled the landscape, searching for prey. The air itself seemed to pulse, a living entity that exhaled an eerie, low whisper. Panic surged in his chest. "This can't be real," he whispered, backing away from the horrifying scene before him. A voice, deep and guttural, erupted from behind him. "It is real, mortal." Ethan spun around to see a monstrous entity, its skin charred and cracked like an overcooked corpse. Horns curled from its forehead, and its eyes burned like molten lava. The demon grinned, revealing a mouth of jagged teeth, each one slick with fresh blood. The creature's breath was rancid, a mix of decay and scorched bone. "Welcome to your eternity." Ethan staggered back, his mind racing. He couldn't stay here. He wouldn't accept this fate. If there was a way in, there had to be a way out. He turned and ran. The ground beneath his feet was unstable, shifting like living flesh. Flames erupted unpredictably from cracks, forcing him to dodge and weave. His path was obscured by walls of suffering souls, their hands reaching out, their skin stretched thin like paper over exposed bone, their hollow eyes filled with bottomless despair. Some of them had no eyes at all, just empty sockets leaking black fluid. They moaned, their voices overlapping in an unholy chorus that threatened to drive him mad. He pushed through, their touch chilling his bones, leaving phantom burns that ached deep into his marrow. Then he saw it, a distant, towering gate, shrouded in darkness rather than flame. It was massive, its black iron bars stretching high into the smog-covered sky. Something told him that was his way out. But he was not alone in his escape. A piercing shriek filled the air as winged creatures descended from above. They had leathery wings, elongated skulls, and hollow eyes that glowed with an unnatural hunger. One swooped down, its claws dripping with a viscous, black substance. Ethan barely managed to roll aside as it slashed at him, its talons tearing through the ground where he had just been standing. The earth where the claws struck bubbled and oozed a dark red liquid, as if it were bleeding. He grabbed a broken chain from the ground, its links rusted and wet with something too thick to be water. Swinging it wildly, he struck the creature, and it recoiled with a hiss, its skin peeling away where the chain had touched. Ethan didn't wait for it to recover. He bolted toward the gate, his breath ragged. The closer he got, the colder the air became. The flames dimmed, replaced by an eerie mist that carried whispers. The voices slithered into his mind, murmuring secrets that made his skin crawl. Faces formed in the mist, faces of those he had wronged, their mouths stretched unnaturally wide in silent screams. Doubt gnawed at him. Was this truly escape, or was it another level of torment? He hesitated only for a second, but that was all the time the demons needed. Clawed hands erupted from the ground, skeletal fingers wrapping around his ankles, dragging him downward. Ethan screamed, struggling, but their grip was iron. The ground beneath him split open, revealing a writhing pit of suffering souls. Their bodies fused together in a grotesque mass, their faces contorted in expressions of never-ending agony. They wailed, their voices sharp as knives, as they reached for him, their fingers elongating unnaturally. pulling him closer to the abyss. The gate loomed ahead, so close yet impossibly far. Then, he heard a voice, a whisper among the chorus of tormented souls. "Say the name." Ethan didn't understand, but instinct took over. He opened his mouth and screamed the first name that came to mind, one that had been etched into his soul since childhood. Lucifer. Everything stopped. The demons released him, their eyes wide with terror. The ground trembled violently, as if hell itself had taken a breath and held it. The very air seemed to shudder, and then the gate creaked open with a sound like 1,000 bones snapping at once. A figure emerged, cloaked in darkness, eyes burning with something beyond human comprehension. Lucifer himself. His presence was suffocating, his beauty and horror intertwined in a way that made Ethan's mind reel. His smile was slow, deliberate, filled with something far more sinister than mere amusement. "Interesting," the fallen angel mused, stepping closer. "You seek escape?" Ethan couldn't speak, could barely breathe under the weight of Lucifer's gaze. The mist around them thickened, shifting, forming images of Ethan's past sins. Every betrayal, every lie, every cruelty was laid bare before him. "Few dare to try," Lucifer continued, his voice smooth as silk yet laced with poison. "Fewer succeed." Ethan swallowed, summoning his courage. "I don't belong here," Lucifer chuckled, a sound that sent shivers through the very foundation of hell. "They all say that. But tell me, mortal, what price are you willing to pay?" The air crackled with energy. The mist turned to shadows, swirling around Ethan like grasping hands. This was it, his one chance. But what cost? Ethan took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Name it." Lucifer's smile widened, his teeth sharp as daggers. "Very well, let the game begin." The shadows lunged, wrapping around Ethan's throat, pulling him into the darkness. He screamed as visions of horrors unknown flooded his mind. Twisted landscapes of suffering, endless corridors of the damned, creatures beyond comprehension lurking just beyond the veil of sanity. The shadows whispered promises, warnings, and threats, warping his perception of time and space. Then silence. Ethan opened his eyes. He was no longer in hell, but he was not free. He stood in a vast, empty void, cold and endless, stretching in all directions. A single mirror stood before him, reflecting not himself, but the smirking face of Lucifer. His own body had changed. His hands were skeletal, his flesh decayed, his soul stripped bare. "Congratulations," Lucifer purred. "You've escaped hell and taken my place." Ethan tried to scream, but no sound came. The void swallowed him whole, and hell had a new master. Moonlight Monster. The town of Black Hollow had always been shrouded in mystery. Nestled deep within the dense forests of New England, it was a place where time seemed to move slower, where shadows stretched longer, and where legends whispered through the wind like echoes of a forgotten past. One legend, in particular, had haunted the town for centuries, the legend of the Moonlight Monster. According to the old tales, every full moon, a creature of unimaginable terror would rise from the depths of the forest, hunting anything unfortunate enough to cross its path. Some claimed it was a werewolf. Others believed it was a spirit cursed to roam the earth forever. Skeptics dismissed it as mere folklore, but those who had seen the monster with their own eyes never lived long enough to tell the tale. The arrival of the stranger. On the eve of a particularly bright full moon, a stranger arrived in Black Hollow. His name was Daniel Graves, a journalist with a reputation for chasing myths and unraveling the truth behind them. He had heard of the Moonlight Monster from an old book he found in a dusty antique store in Boston. The book contained accounts from those who had survived encounters with the creature, stories of glowing red eyes, razor-sharp claws, and an unholy howl that sent shivers down even the bravest spines. Determined to uncover the truth, Daniel checked into the only inn in town, the Silver Lantern. The innkeeper, an elderly woman named Margaret, gave him a wary glance as she handed him the keys to his room. "You'd best stay indoors tonight, Mr. Graves," she warned. "The moon will be full, and the beast does not take kindly to strangers." Daniel smiled politely, dismissing her concerns. "I'll be fine, ma'am. I intend to be out there, watching." Margaret sighed and muttered something under her breath before retreating behind the counter. As Daniel climbed the creaky wooden stairs, he could feel the weight of the town's silence pressing down on him. It was as if Black Hollow itself was holding its breath. The hallway to his room seemed to stretch unnaturally long, and the flickering candlelight cast distorted shadows on the walls. For a brief moment, he thought he saw a face staring at him from a mirror, but when he turned, there was nothing there. The first night, equipped with his camera, notebook, and a flashlight, Daniel ventured into the woods just as the moon reached its peak. The forest was eerily quiet, save for the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind. He walked cautiously, his senses on high alert, searching for any sign of the beast. Then he heard it. A low, guttural growl resonated through the trees, freezing him in place. His heart pounded as he turned slowly, aiming his flashlight into the darkness. The beam of light cut through the shadows, revealing claw marks on the bark of a nearby tree. Deep, fresh, and unmistakably inhuman. Before he could react, a blood-curdling howl pierced the air. The sound was unlike anything he had ever heard, an unearthly mixture of rage and agony. Branches snapped behind him, and a sudden gust of wind carried the foul stench of decay. The air grew colder, and he could hear wet, heavy breathing just inches away. Daniel ran. Twigs and leaves crunched beneath his boots as he sprinted back toward town, his lungs burning with every breath. He dared not look back, afraid of what he might see. Something massive crashed through the trees behind him, its footsteps so heavy they made the ground tremble. When he finally reached the inn, he slammed the door shut and collapsed against it, gasping for air. Margaret was waiting for him, her expression grim. "You saw it, didn't you?" Daniel nodded, his hands trembling. "It's real, and it's hunting," unraveling the truth. Determined to uncover the origins of the beast, Daniel spent the following day speaking with the town's elders. He learned that centuries ago, Black Hollow had been home to a coven of witches who practiced forbidden rituals under the full moon. One night, a ritual went horribly wrong, and a man was cursed to transform into a creature of night, doomed to hunt under the moonlight until the curse was broken. The townsfolk had tried to kill the monster countless times, but it always returned. Some believed it could only be stopped by destroying its heart. Others thought an ancient incantation held the key, but no one knew for sure. As night approached, Daniel armed himself with a silver dagger, a camera, and a lantern filled with blessed oil. He was determined to end the legend once and for all. The final confrontation. The full moon rose, casting an eerie glow over the forest. Daniel ventured out again, this time following the deep claw marks he had found the night before. The air was thick with tension, and every rustle of leaves sent a chill down his spine. The trees seemed to whisper in hushed voices, their twisted branches resembling skeletal fingers reaching out to him. Then he saw it. A hulking figure emerged from the shadows, its eyes glowing red like burning embers. Its body was covered in matted fur, its claws glistened under the moonlight, and its fangs dripped with saliva. The moonlight monster. Daniel raised his camera, snapping a photo just as the creature let out a deafening roar. It charged at him with terrifying speed, and he barely had time to react. He rolled to the side, gripping the silver dagger tightly in his hands. As he scrambled to his feet, he caught a glimpse of something horrifying. Faces. The monster's fur seemed to shift, and within it, he saw the screaming faces of its past victims, their mouths frozen in eternal terror. The beast lunged again, swiping its claws at him. Daniel dodged, plunging the dagger into its side. The monster howled in pain, staggering backward. Seizing the moment, he grabbed his lantern and hurled it at the creature, dousing it in flames. The fire engulfed the beast, and its howls turned into agonized screams. It thrashed wildly before collapsing onto the ground, its body dissolving into ash beneath the moonlight. The faces within its fur twisted in silent agony before vanishing into the wind. Silence fell over the forest. Epilogue. When Daniel returned to town, the air felt different, lighter, freer. The curse had been lifted, and the moonlight monster was no more. Margaret greeted him at the inn with a knowing smile. "You did it, Mr. Graves. The town owes you a great debt." Daniel simply nodded, exhaustion washing over him. As he packed his things the next morning, he couldn't shake the feeling that the legend of the moonlight monster would live on. Not as a terror, but as a warning. Some evils, after all, should never be forgotten. As he drove away from Black Hollow, the full moon still hung in the sky, its silver light illuminating the road ahead. And for a brief moment, he swore he heard a distant howl echoing through the night. Then, in the rearview mirror, a pair of glowing red eyes flickered in the darkness behind him. His blood ran cold as his car engine sputtered, and the air inside the vehicle grew unbearably cold. The last thing he heard before everything went black was the sound of claws scraping against metal and a guttural growl whispering his name. The legend, it seemed, was not over after all. Bloody Investigation. Chapter 1. The First Crime Scene. Detective Alan Graves had seen many gruesome cases in his career, but nothing prepared him for what awaited at 23 Maplewood Drive. The call came in at midnight. A woman's voice, shaky and terrified, had reported screaming from the house next door. Officers arrived first, securing the perimeter, but what they found inside left them speechless. The living room was a slaughterhouse. Blood streaked the walls, soaking into the once pristine carpet. A mutilated body lay sprawled across the couch, limbs twisted unnaturally. The victim, identified as Jonathan Pierce, a well-respected journalist, had deep gashes across his torso, his eyes missing from their sockets, and a look of sheer horror frozen on his lifeless face. Deep claw marks were carved into the walls, as if something inhuman had been there. Alan exhaled sharply, the metallic scent of blood thick in the air. His partner, Detective Sarah Whitmore, stood beside him, taking in the scene with a hardened expression. "This isn't just a murder. This is a statement," she murmured. Alan nodded. "Let's start with the basics. Entry points, signs of struggle. Something here will tell us who did this." Then, a faint scratching noise echoed from the ceiling. Both detectives looked up. Long, jagged gouges lined the plaster, and in the darkness above, something shifted. Chapter 2. A Cryptic Clue. As forensic teams processed the scene, something caught Alan's eye. Etched into the coffee table, carved with what appeared to be the victim's own fingernails, were the words, "He is watching." Alan felt a chill run down his spine. "Who is he?" he wondered aloud. Sarah crouched beside the table, tracing the letters with her gloved fingers. Jonathan was an investigative journalist. What if he got too close to something dangerous? She turned to Alan. "We need to dig into his latest work." After securing the crime scene, they headed to Jonathan's apartment, hoping to find any notes or files that could hint at what he had been investigating. His laptop was missing, but a desk drawer revealed a crumpled notepad. The last few entries read, "Strange disappearances near Hollow Creek. They know I'm watching. If I go missing, tell Graves to look for the red mask." A noise made Alan freeze. The closet door creaked open by itself. Inside, there was nothing but a single blood-stained shoe. Chapter 3. The Red Mask. "The red mask," Alan repeated, frowning. Sarah pulled out her phone, running a quick search. There's a legend about a killer who wore a red mask, but it's just folklore. Some say it was an executioner from the 1800s who took justice into his own hands. But if Jonathan wrote this down, maybe it's not just a legend. Determined, they drove to Hollow Creek, a secluded area on the outskirts of town. The town had a ghostly aura, with thick fog rolling over the streets and a silence that felt unnatural. Shadows seemed to move on their own, twisting into grotesque shapes in the dim moonlight. They stopped at a local diner, where an old man named Earl seemed eager to talk. "You're digging where you shouldn't be, detectives," he muttered. "People who ask about the red mask don't come back." Alan leaned forward. "We just want the truth. What do you know?" Earl glanced around nervously before lowering his voice. "Jonathan was here a few days ago, asking the same questions. He said he found something in the woods near the abandoned mill. That was the last time I saw him." Chapter 4: The Forest of Secrets. That night, armed with flashlights and weapons, Alan and Sarah ventured into the woods near the old mill. The air was damp, and every step seemed to echo louder than it should. Then they saw it, a cabin hidden behind thick vegetation. Inside, the stench of decay was overpowering. The walls were covered in flayed human skin, stretched and nailed like trophies. Photographs lined the walls. Victims, all with their eyes gouged out, their mouths sewn shut in eternal screams. A red mask hung in the center, crimson stains marking its surface. Then, the door slammed shut behind them. A slow, dragging noise came from the shadows, followed by a guttural whisper. "You shouldn't have come here." A set of bloodied, human fingers clattered to the floor from the rafters. Chapter 5: The Monster Revealed. A chilling laugh echoed through the cabin. Alan spun around, gun raised. A figure emerged from the darkness, a man wearing a red mask, his eyes gleaming with madness. His hands were covered in dried blood, his fingernails jagged from years of clawing. "You came looking for me," he hissed, "and now you'll join them." Alan fired, but the man was fast, ducking and slashing at him with a gleaming knife. Sarah tackled him from behind, struggling to pull the mask off. As it slipped away, they saw his face, Earl. But Earl's skin was rotting, stitched together from different victims, his lips curling into a grotesque grin. His eyes, stolen from others, were mismatched, one milky white, the other bloodshot with broken veins. "You should have stayed away," he sneered before biting down on something in his mouth. He convulsed violently, foaming at the mouth before collapsing dead, but not before whispering, "He's still watching." Then, the cabin's walls seemed to tremble. The shadows on the walls contorted, revealing faces, screaming, writhing, their mouths open in silent agony. Something was still inside. Chapter 6: The Truth Unveiled. The case closed, but questions lingered. How had Earl stayed hidden for so long? And was he the only one? Back at the station, Alan couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He glanced at his reflection in the mirror of his office. For a moment, just a fleeting second, the reflection wasn't his own. His own mouth twisted into a silent scream, his eyes gone, replaced by hollow, black voids. Jonathan Pierce had been right. There was a killer hiding in plain sight. But as Alan stared at the red mask, he realized the real horror had only just begun. The legend wasn't just a story, and the true nightmare. A whisper slithered through the air behind him, a cold breath on his neck. "You're next." The lights flickered, the mirror shattered. Alan turned and screamed.